When Victor Eric Bredin first met Nikki Melody Thomas Scott, he led the bubbly, naive stripper to believe that he was the real Victor Newman's manservant. Great start. Before long, Victor was telling Nikki he didn't love her and forcing her to marry a sweet dupe named Kevin, while Nikki was lying that Kevin, not Victor, was Victoria's, Amelia Heinel, biological father. By the time they got married for the first time, Victoria was a toddler, and Nikki and Victor were convinced the worst was behind them. Victor and Nikki have cheated on each other, taunted each other, tortured each other, and then remarried again, as if none of it had ever happened. Most recently, Nikki walked out on Victor after learning that he'd kidnapped Jack, Peter Bergman, and almost gotten him killed. Nikki demanded that Victor drop his stupid, selfish, petty, and illogical vendetta against her ex-husband. Victor said something about maybe, possibly something. That was good enough for Nikki. For years, Victor Newman and Nikki Newman have weathered storms that would have destroyed most relationships, yet somehow they have always found their way back to each other. That history makes every quiet moment between them just as meaningful as the biggest family showdown. This time, however, the atmosphere feels different. Instead of reacting to another crisis, they find themselves reflecting on everything they have survived together, realizing that the future they once assumed would always be theirs suddenly feels more precious than ever. Victor has spent much of his life believing that strength means staying one step ahead of every threat. Whether protecting his business empire or defending the Newman family from rivals, he has always relied on control as his greatest weapon. But even someone as determined as Victor eventually reaches a point where experience outweighs pride. Looking back on years of victories mixed with painful sacrifices, he begins to recognize that some of the deepest wounds within his family were never caused by outside enemies. They came from fear, stubbornness, and choices made in the name of protection. Nikki sees this change more clearly than anyone else because she has lived beside Victor through every triumph and disappointment. She understands the pressure he carries, but she also knows the emotional cost that comes with constantly fighting every battle alone. Rather than criticizing him, Nikki gently reminds him that the people who love him are not asking for perfection. They simply want honesty, trust, and the reassurance that family will always come before power. Those words strike Victor differently than they might have years ago, because they echo feelings he has quietly struggled to admit. Their conversation gradually shifts away from business conflicts and old rivalries towards something much more personal. Instead of discussing who has betrayed the family or what challenge may come next, they begin talking about what kind of legacy they truly want to leave behind. They realize that wealth, influence, and success have defined much of their lives, yet those achievements mean little if the family itself continues to carry emotional scars that never fully heal. For the first time in a long while, both of them seem more interested in preserving relationships than winning another battle. That realization leads Victor and Nikki toward a promise that feels both deeply emotional and surprisingly simple. They quietly agree that whatever challenges lie ahead, they will face them together with greater honesty, patience, and understanding. Instead of allowing secrets, pride, or impulsive decisions to pull them apart again, they commit themselves to listening before judging and supporting one another before making choices that affect the entire family. It is not a dramatic declaration designed to impress anyone else. It is a private commitment built on decades of love, mistakes, forgiveness, and hard-earned wisdom. Even so, neither Victor nor Nikki is naive enough to believe that making a promise automatically guarantees success. They know their family has endured countless conflicts fueled by ambition, resentment, and competing loyalties. Old habits are difficult to break, especially for people whose identities have long been shaped by power and responsibility. That awareness gives their promise even greater emotional weight because they understand the real challenge begins only after the words have been spoken. The emotional contrast is impossible to ignore. On one side stands hope, strengthened by years of surviving impossible circumstances together. On the other stands uncertainty, created by the painful knowledge that history often repeats itself when people become comfortable or distracted. Victor wants to believe he can approach future conflicts differently, while Nikki hopes that love and trust can finally become stronger than fear and control. Their shared determination creates optimism, but it also raises questions about whether genuine change is truly possible after so many years. As this deeply personal moment comes to an end, the focus naturally widens beyond the couple themselves. Any meaningful change between Victor and Nikki is almost certain to influence every member of the Newman family, whether through renewed unity, unexpected tension, or difficult decisions that test everyone's loyalty. Their promise may become the foundation for a stronger future, but it could just as easily expose unresolved emotions that have been buried for far too long. That uncertainty leaves one compelling question hanging in the air. Can this heartfelt commitment truly reshape the future of the Newman family, or is it about to face its first and greatest test? Victor and Nikki's promise may have been made in private, but its impact is unlikely to remain behind closed doors for long. In the Newman family, even the smallest shift in attitude can create waves that reach every relationship. Their commitment is not just about strengthening their marriage. It represents the possibility of changing how the entire family moves forward. The real question is whether years of deeply rooted habits can truly be replaced by trust, patience, and understanding, or whether old patterns will eventually pull everyone back into familiar conflicts. For Victor, honoring this promise may prove to be the greatest personal challenge of all. He has spent decades believing that carrying every burden alone is the only way to protect the people he loves. Making difficult decisions without consulting others has often felt like responsibility rather than control. Yet those same choices have repeatedly created distance between him and his children, leaving misunderstandings that linger long after the immediate crisis has passed. If Victor genuinely wants a different future, he may have to accept that strength sometimes comes from listening instead of leading. Nikki understands that real change cannot happen overnight. She has watched Victor fight impossible battles and survive setbacks that would have broken almost anyone else. She also knows that the qualities that made him such a powerful leader are the same qualities that occasionally prevent him from opening his heart completely. Instead of demanding instant transformation, Nikki hopes their promise will encourage small but meaningful changes. A single honest conversation, a willingness to admit fear, or a decision to trust family members with difficult truths could become the first steps toward lasting healing. Of course, the rest of the Newman family may not immediately recognize this new approach. Years of emotional wounds do not disappear simply because Victor and Nikki have reached a fresh understanding. Some family members could welcome this change with cautious optimism, believing that a more united Victor and Nikki might finally bring stability during uncertain times. Others, however, may struggle to believe that things are truly different. Past disappointments have taught them to guard their expectations, making trust something that must be earned rather than assumed. That emotional divide creates one of the most fascinating possibilities moving forward. Every interaction now carries greater meaning because each decision Victor and Nikki make will either reinforce their promise or quietly weaken it. If they respond to future disagreements with patience instead of anger, they could inspire others to reconsider old resentments. But if pressure causes them to fall back into familiar habits of secrecy, control, or impulsive judgment, the disappointment could feel even greater because hope had finally begun to grow. Another important question centers on legacy. For years, Victor has measured success through the strength of the Newman name, the power of his business empire, and the ability to protect everything he built. Now he may begin to realize that his greatest legacy will not be defined by financial victories, but by the relationships he leaves behind. Nikki has always understood that family cannot flourish through fear alone. Her greatest wish is not merely preserving the Newman empire, but ensuring that future generations inherit stronger bonds instead of unresolved pain. The emotional contrast becomes even more compelling as optimism collides with uncertainty. On one side stands the belief that people can grow regardless of age or past mistakes. On the other stands the undeniable reality that old habits often return when emotions run high. Victor and Nikki have overcome enormous obstacles before, but this challenge asks something entirely different of them. Instead of defeating an outside enemy, they must confront their own instincts, pride, and fears. That internal battle may ultimately prove far more difficult than any business rivalry or family feud they have ever faced.